Hey folks, this is Marley from Wild by Nature and welcome to Module 2 of the Nature Connection as a Way of Life online course. Thanks for joining me or joining us this week. This week we're going to be looking at a couple of things. We're going to focus on the deep nature connection model via the core routines, some mind states of connection and the attributes of a connected human, and see how they're placed in the deep nature connection model. And we're also going to shift from last week's energy in the east, the sunrise, sort of newborn childlike innocence, to the northeast, which is the mid-morning, and it's a much more energized period. And we're going to look at some of the practices that we might bring into our lives around the northeast. So before we begin, I'm going to read a little passage from Nature and the Human Soul, one of the key books in guiding these teachings and my own around human development in connected culture with wild nature. And this is by Richard Lewis from Living by Wonder, but the book is by Bill Plotkin. And it goes a little something like this. In our grasshopper and salamander days, who amongst us didn't ask why the grasshopper could jump so far? Or why the salamander had black dots on its orange body? We trampled leaves with our feet just to hear what kind of sounds leaves made. We threw flat stones over the surface of streams to see how far the stones could skip. We listened to crickets cry in nights far beyond our grasp of what darkness was. We slept only to wake with a strange sense of how we could be awake when we had only just been sleeping. In those days, we knew as much as we had to know in order to ask what we didn't know. Our ignorance wasn't just innocence, but the foundation from which we offered ourselves the daily surprise of discovering another question, another way to uncover something mysterious, something we hadn't understood yesterday. We lived by wonder, for by wondering we were able to multiply a growing consciousness of being alive. And I think that captures a lot about what this week is going to be focusing on. So, let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning we were talking about this idea that deep nature connection is a felt sense of being part of a web. Us in that web, our human community, our more than human community, our earth, and perhaps all the way up to the cosmos. And that the deeper we felt this, then the more at home we are in our body, in our community, and in our place. And we spoke that the core routines of deep nature connection were a pathway, or the core routines were a pathway to that sense. And they were a pathway through the mind states, through the attributes where we actually embody and live deep nature connection. So we're going to start to have a closer look at what we mean by core routines of nature connection. Now, this term was originally coined by John Young and the Eight Shields organization. And what they did is they had a look at cultures around the world, and they tried to map some of the core practices that were visible in many of these cultures, these traditional cultures. And what they found, that there was a lot of overlap with a number of practices, key practices. And they took those practices and they gave them a name that makes sense in our modern way of living. Now, in terms of the detail with a lot of what happens in this video, I encourage you to go to the notes, because the notes have the list and it's probably easier for you to look and read to go back to. But in those core routines, I'll read them out just quickly so we get a sense of what it's about. So last week we explored the chorus of the core routines, which was the sit spot, and the other chorus of the core routines, which is story of the day, or sharing our story. Now, on top of that, we also had practices for a third routine, which is the expanding our senses. Last week we did that with a really childlike innocence and wonder. This week we're going to move it a bit more. Then we've got the core routines of questioning and tracking, animal forms, wandering, mapping, exploring the field guides, or researching ecological knowledge. We've got journaling, or recording our adventures, survival living, so the skills that allow us to live in wild nature or with wild nature. We've got mind's eye imagining, critical in the last week and this week's practices, listening for bird language, and we've got Thanksgiving. These are the 13 listed by the 8 Shields organization, and they're an excellent way to start to imagine what we can bring into our lives, or what we might even emphasize or cultivate more to move ourselves towards a sense of connection. In the notes you'll see that I've also put them into categories which are a little more based around, I guess, bundles of practices. So have a read of those, and you'll see there's some questions there around how we bring them into our lives. But let's imagine that these core routines are powerful and worthwhile exploring, and that through exploring them, the goal is to bring ourselves into a mind state of connection. Now, a mind state of connection might be something which is a temporary place we go. Probably one of the most common ones we think about is through meditation and that place of stillness and deep awareness. But I'm going to list a few going around this spiral of energy, which we'll also talk about a little bit more about later. But mind states of connection might be, in that place of the east, a sense of safety, being held, warm and welcome. In the northeast, we might have a sense of curiosity and play. In the north, it might be that we're engaged and we have determination and focus, and that our mind is really pointed on something. In the northwest, we might have a mind state of feeling really relaxed, internal, embodied, grounded. In the west, we might have a sense of wanting to offer. Like we've gone full circle, now we're ready to give, so it's a sense of wanting to be helpful, to be of service, and to feel that, like we have purpose. So feeling purposeful. As we move to the southwest, we might be having more of a reflective internal sense, a sort of post-fireside nature where we're processing, so we're in internal processing. In the south, in that sort of midnight energy, we might have a mind state of dreaming, of imagining, but also of just an unconditional love. You know, that sense of just full love for our village, our people, our place. And then as we move to the southeast, in that place of between death and life, particularly in age, as we age, we might be in a place of pure presence, but also pure acceptance. So accepting what is, the nature of change, which a lot of modern Buddhist meditation practices aim to get us to a place there. But let's keep in mind that being connected is not always being in a still mind, that we have all these other energies. And we started to explore them last week in the East, with that presence, that wonder. This week we're going to look more at the mind state, cultivating the mind state of play and curiosity. And we'll come back to that when we talk more about the East. But before we do, let's just have a little look at the attributes of a connected human. And again, this comes from the Coyote's Guide and the 8 Shields. And what they've done is they've taken some of the ways that traditional cultures, particularly North American Indian or First Nations people there, would watch their children grow and watch them develop in certain qualities or attributes. And they've taken some of the common ones and put them into 8 categories as well. So the idea is that as we practice core routines and we cultivate the mind states of connection, over time these lead to more permanent attributes, qualities of connection. So that's what we're trying to foster in ourselves and hopefully in our village or children or those that we support. The 8 attributes listed by the 8 Shields organization are in the east we have the happiness of a newborn child welcomed. In the northeast we have vitality, being full of energy. In the north we have a commitment to paying back or mentoring. In the northwest we have a sense of empathy and respect for our body and the body of the earth. In the west we have this attribute of being truly helpful, truly of service. In the southwest, we have an attribute of, in the southwest, we have the attribute of being fully alive. So we've found a purpose, we've been given that purpose, and then now we just feel like we're just fully alive. We're so happy to be alive. In the south, in the elderhood, we have the attribute of unconditional love. And in the southeast, we have the attribute of the quiet mind. Quiet mind. So in this course, we're only focusing on the east, northeast, north, and northwest over the 4 weeks. But you can explore those attributes in more detail a little bit in the notes, and also if you choose to purchase it, Coyote's Guide or many of the 8 Shields teachings. But let's just keep in mind and keep in body that this is a guide to how we're doing on our nature connection journey, or those we mentor, and it's kind of like a goal that if we can expand the level of these attributes, so too are we expanding our level of connection, or so it's told. So let's now move to the northeast. Let's come to the northeast and talk a little bit about that, because that's the focus of this week's practices and play. So in the northeast, we might imagine that this is the stage of mid-morning, when the sun has started to warm up our bodies and they're really getting ready to move. We start to have an excitement and feel motivated to go out into the day and to explore and to move our bodies and to play. And so it's also the energy you might find in childhood, once kids can get moving, and they'll go off and they'll just disappear into the bush or into the urban wilds for the day if they're given the freedom to do so, and they just naturally embody it. And this week at our live meetup, we were fortunate enough to have 3 wonderfully wild children who are part of our village who really demonstrated that. You can catch a few of the photos and videos on Facebook, and it was wonderful to connect with them because they allowed us adults to go into that place more easily, which is the value of having this whole village approach. But I think that for a lot of us as adults, we may have missed out on that energy a little bit, or we may be missing that energy because there's plenty of research on traditional cultures. Peter Gray is an excellent source, Peter Gray, that in his research, Free to Learn, Free to Play is the book, that in traditional cultures, play wasn't something that just the kids did. It was something that's carried through until death, basically, and that it has a key role to play in the learning of skills, in maintaining social harmony, in maintaining a sense of happiness and joy for life, and in diffusing difficult situations. Bonobos are a great animal that are an example of this, and my personal favourite, which comes from my favourite way of playing, and that's going into the ocean as a surfer and playing with the waves. And I've been, as I said in a post recently, I've been visited a lot, and even in Newcastle city beaches, by the dolphins, and they are such a wonderful embodiment of play and an inspiration for me, and they motivate me to approach life and the waves in a playful manner. So let's imagine that we can bring that energy into our bodies even as adults. And sometimes we might not always have it there because our bodies aren't always moving the way they used to, or maybe we're feeling stressed out by something like work or responsibility, or that play is something that I did once but I don't need to do it anymore. Or maybe you already know that play is a really important part but you're just not sure how to bring it in. Well, this is some ideas around how we can do it in a nature-connected way. Okay? So the first thing is that we do need to remember that our bodies have limitations and abilities, and that we can't always move like a child yet, but we can move towards that, and it's never too late to restart. And I won't go into too much detail now, but I know I've been on a journey, and a lot of people are on a journey about rediscovering their bodies, rediscovering how their bodies can play and move, and realizing that we need to maybe get a bit of support from some sort of rehabilitation or movement class, or maybe it's Feldenkrais or DNS or some form that gets us to start to allow our bodies to move more freely, because that's really important. So the practices this week are going to be invitational, and a way to embody that play. And I think I'm going to have to turn the camera around. Now I'll put it over here to be able to show you them. So this week's practices, Northeast Energy. So the first invitational practice is to start to reacquaint ourselves with our bodies connected to the earth. And so I hope the camera captures enough. But I invite you to find a patch, ideally near your sit spot is a great way to do it, but a patch of floor or grass where you can lie down on the earth and just start to see how your body feels in a still place, warm and welcome like last week. And just start to explore different ways you can roll around and in quite a pleasurable way just let your body get a bit of an earth massage and see the different ways you might roll on the earth. A little bit like a monkey, letting your body do what it chooses and coming up to sitting and rolling back down, moving your hips and just allowing yourself to move around on the floor and become comfortable with the earth again, because it's a great place to start. And if we can start to be comfortable with our body on the earth, it might relax, and the more it relaxes, the more it might be willing to move. So it's a great warm-up before any sort of session of movement anyway, whether you're going surfing, whether you're going to a dance class, or whether you just want to do something at the start of the day after you've done some meditation or some sit spot practice. Then we have a next invitation. If you have time or are near some sort of backyard wild nature or in your sit spot and you've warmed your body up and you started to get motivated, we want to try to explore the idea of the animal body. We are an animal body, and as an animal body, what humans can do better than a lot of other animals is we can imitate or mimic them in the way we move and in the way we sound. So our bodies contain much of the elements that most species do who have a spine. And so it's also said that the more we can move like the animals, the more our mirror neurons fire, the more empathy and connection we have with them. And that goes not just for animals, but all beings. So there's a lot of value in being able to imitate, mimic, move like and sound like the beings in our environment. So when we do our games at our camps and yesterday and in general, we often explore animal forms a lot. And it's become a new, I don't know if fad's the right word, but a lot of the movement classes these days are based around that. So before we start to take off, we might explore how our animal body can move in the forms of animals. Crawling is an excellent one. We might explore the way we can crawl more like a dingo or a dog. We might explore the way we can move closer to the ground, more like a goanna, a crocodile or a lizard. We might explore the way we can move more like a monkey, rolling around, just what feels good for our body, or even some sort of macropod, a roo. And as we start to realize that our body can move in many ways, particularly not just bipedally and at different levels, then we realize that as we go into nature, we can interact with nature in a different way. We no longer have to be stuck to our rigid, linear, flat ground movement. When we meet a rock, a tree, a pool, a pond, any sort of terrain which is not just your basic sidewalk, then we can approach it and move across, through, with, above and below it in a different way. Crawling, hopping, leaping, skipping, climbing, hanging, balancing, diving, rolling. All of the ways we might explore it from a more playful animal type of body. The way you would see kids just go out and explore a playground, or even better, a wild playground. So that's the mindset, that's the second practice. First one, get to know the earth. Second practice, get into our animal body, and then find a place where we can go and explore it. Now we might find that there are people around and they make us feel nervous, so if you can take a friend with you, even better, because you'll feel less, maybe less shame or fear about being silly, but it's a great edge to work. Just finding what our edge is. And if you really want to test the edge, well, you can start to make some of the sounds that you hear or see in nature, or just some that you know. You might make the sounds of the animals that you move as. For example, we're monkey. Maybe you listen for a bird and you hear a bird call in the distance. Or maybe you just sit in silence like the quiet tawny frog mouth watching. There's no rules. It's just what feels good in the moment. And it's purely a practice of play and curiosity. And with that curiosity, you might start to discover things that you didn't notice before because you'll be at different levels. And you start to notice what's close to the earth or what's up in a tree. And as you do that, you're going to collect stories. And we go back to our core routine of sharing stories. So as opposed to going on a sit spot, this is more like a wild exploration, getting in our animal form. And when we come back, we will also have a story to share. And this week the invitation is to A, share those stories via words, perhaps on a Facebook group or with a friend, but also how else could we share these stories? Maybe we want to journal about them. Maybe we want to draw a picture, or maybe we brought something back, an object, which we turn into a piece of nature craft or art, or we just take that object like an egg or a nest that was okay to take if we feel alright about it, of course, and we share that story using the object as a reference, because that's all is really powerful. Maybe you take a photo. At the course the other day, we shared our story via animal noises. We didn't even use language. I don't know if you can find someone to share like that, but essentially you're just using gobbledygook in the form of animal language to share your story. Get us out of that, always in that language part of our brain. That's the invitation. The invitation. Connect with the earth and our animal body. Get that animal body moving out in nature and bring back a story to share. So I hope I get to hear or see some. If you go on the Facebook group, you'll notice there's one, an excellent little video that I'm going to post about. You can see our crazy group moving into the playground like a bunch of wild apes. And I hope that we get some of those stories or pictures from yourself. I hope you have a really playful week and really get to embody that energy of the Northeast, the energy of childhood, and reconnect with that. Particularly if you've got children to play with, go out and do it. And I hope that you might join us next week. Next week we're going to move from the northeast to the north, more focused fire energy, kind of that adolescence energy. And we're going to look at mentoring next week, because that's a bundle around the art of questioning and the art of mentoring, which becomes really critical by that age, and is also a really important part and tool of this nature connection model for ourselves and for others. So until then, I wish you play, joy, curiosity, exploration, and hopefully see you next week.